Stasiland. Okay, so here we are, chapter 16, Socialist Man. This is quite a poignant chapter, I think. I mean, there are some quite grim chapters in the book, aren't there? But this is one that I think, just because of how systemic the propaganda and the way in which it targets the children, I find it really moving, this chapter, and I feel it's quite harrowing, I think. But let's have a look at it nonetheless, shall we? So the title, Socialist Man, is again seeding an idea that we get a little bit later on. We realise what this type of man, and it's a sort of allegory or an extended metaphor based on the idea of evolution and sort of Darwin's evolutionary man. But we start off with a time marker. So we're back to the idea of narrative progression using the time markers in August 1960. Oh, actually, no, I misread that, haven't I? It's not really a current time marker. It's a historical time marker here. So this is a background section filling in those details, but using those time markers nonetheless to give us that sense of history and detail, which of course is so important. We learn a lot in this chapter, don't we, of history and of how the East German politics and how Germany was carved up just after World War II. So let's have a look. There's not masses to say in this one, really, because it's largely dialogue again, but where there are bits, obviously I'll stop and say things, but there are whole sections. It's quite a long chapter, but there are whole sections where I'll let it play because there's not a great deal to say about it. I won't stop it just for the sake of it.
Chapter 16. Socialist Man. In August 1961, a fresh Stasi recruit named Hagen Koch walked the streets of Berlin with a tin of paint and a brush and painted the line where the wall would go. He was 21 years old, and he was Secretary General Honecker's personal cartographer. Unlike most heads of state, Honecker needed a personal cartographer because he was redrawing the limits of the free world.
Just that repetition there of personal cartographer, it's repeated there for gentle mockery, or possibly not so gentle mockery, but certainly making fun, isn't it, of the fact that General Honecker had a personal cartographer. You know, who else in history, really, can you think of who had a personal cartographer? Not many, because it's so absurd, isn't it? But of course, this is an absurd and unique time. This is when literally the whole landscape, politically and geographically, was being carved up and divided. I do apologise if these noises are irritating from Teams. It might just be coming through my headphones, hopefully not going into the recording. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it's like, I don't know, what's it like? Anna Funder would have a good simile for this, wouldn't she? What's it like? I don't know. Lots of pings and whistles and bells and alarms. I don't know. I'll think about it and I'll maybe get back to you at the end of the chapter with a suitable simile. A Funder-esque simile. Let's see.
Koch's apartment is a cell in a honeycomb of high-rises where a lot of other former Stasi officers and their families lived before the wall fell and live still.
Just one more point before we forget this, or I forget it again. Towards the end of that, the very end of that first paragraph, it talks about redrawing the limits of the free world. It sounds hyperbolic, but actually it's not, is it? That's reality. So it's using that sort of phrase that sounds hyperbolic, but it was literally doing that. It was redrawing. I mean, it's metaphorical, I guess, but redrawing is. But again, there's some truth in that too. Was it a matter of drawing systematically and carving up a country, and therefore also its political landscape?
The balconies have all been painted a pinkish colour. On some of them, sun umbrellas are furled in hibernation. The man who opens the door has a sort of glow about him, a bright face, receding hair and soft brown eyes. Koch smiles broadly and shakes my hand. He gestures around himself exuberantly, like a ringmaster. "Welcome to the Wall Archive," he says. All along the corridor hang framed colour photocopies of what were once top-secret Stasi maps. They show various parts of the wall in aerial view, with a colour-coded key for the guard towers, mine traps, dogs and tripwires. Black, yellow, red East German pennants are pinned on the wall.
I won't stop it, but there's the asynthetic list there, of course, to show the severity of the Stasi and the
hangs from hooks,
GDR.
deflated as a scarecrow. More obscure mementos of the regime sit in glass-fronted cupboards. As we walk along the corridor, I think I see a crocheted doily in the national colours. Koch talked...
Oh, hang on, let's just stop that. Yeah, so the simile there, deflated as a scarecrow, is a telling one, isn't it? Sort of, again, it's undermining it. It sort of suggests it's empty and pathetic. And then at the end of that paragraph, you got the crocheted doily in the national colours. It's quite absurd, isn't it? It's quite funny and kind of ridiculous. The idea that you'd have a doily is quite a sort of pointless thing anyway, isn't it, really? But a crocheted doily in the national colours, it's sort of extreme and it's absurd and it just sounds out of place. So there's use of bathos there at the end of that paragraph too, because it's, after all these things, it sort of comes down to a crocheted doily, which is the most, ineffective, pointless thing you can imagine, really, isn't it, in a sense? I mean, all that time spent crocheting something, and, the purpose of a doily is not really that important, really.
As we walk, and by the time we reach his study, he is listing off on his fingers the VIPs who have been to see him and his archive. Behind his desk, a large gold plate bearing the East German hammer and compass shines out from just above head height. The room is lined with framed newspaper articles. The pictures show Koch with his visitors. He looks straight into the camera, clean-featured and moon-faced and beaming. Koch with the Queen of Sweden. Koch with an actor from Star Trek. Koch with Christo, the rap artist.
I mean, don't get me wrong, if you enjoy crocheting doilies, then I take it back. If you're a secret doily crocheter, then I do apologise. Sorry, just getting bombarded by messages and emails and things. So there's some anaphora there, isn't there? Starting with his name, or his sort of. Well, there's a few things. The asymptotic list of into the camera, clean-featured and moon-faced and beaming. It says qualities of this young man, not as a young man. And then all the people he's seen with this Queen of Sweden, an actor from Star Trek, and Christo, the rap artist. Is it spelled WRAP in your book as well, I wonder? It is in mine. How strange. Because that's not really a type of music, is it, rap? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could. You'd be quite good at rapping presents if you did, like, rap. If you're, like, a hip-hop dancer, I suppose you could bring the sellotape across in a whip, couldn't you? And then, I don't know. Interesting, but let's move on, because I don't think there's much to be gleaned from this bit of the book.
He is more than comfortable with the tiny microphone on my tape recorder. When I ask if I might clip it to his shirt, he takes it from me and wields it like a rock star. His forearms are honey brown and lightly haired. I ask him how he had applied to join the Stasi. No. It didn't work like that. You had to be chosen. Apparently, this was one of the fundamentals of the system. Don't call us, we'll call you. Who chose you, then? Just a moment, he says. It is hard for you to understand. Without understanding my childhood, you can't see why anyone would want to join the Stasi. This isn't quite true. I've given a lot of thought to why people would want to join. In a society riven into us and them, an ambitious young person might well want to be one of the group in the know, one of the unmolested. If there was never going to be an end to your country and you could never leave, why wouldn't you opt for a peaceful life and a satisfying career? What interests me is the process of dealing with that decision now that it's all over. Can you rework your past, the grit that rubs in you until it is shiny and smooth as a pearl? My upbringing was so... He searches for the words. So GDR. His eyebrows move up and down. Everything that was GDR positive, that was me. Koch turns to a large cardboard box on the floor beside his desk. My father put me on this track. He reaches into the box and pulls out a brownish photograph of his father in army uniform, with the expression men in armed services pictures often have, as if they are already elsewhere. Then he goes back to the box and produces a school report. He flashes it at me, and I see the old-style Gothic handwriting. Koch starts to read. Hagen was a diligent and orderly pupil. And then he reads on through the report. We are right back at the beginning of his life. I look at the box, and the box is deep. It seems this afternoon we are going to go through it piece by plastic-wrapped piece.
Okay, I missed that at the top of the page there. There's the reference to, can you rework your past, the grit that rubs in you until it's shiny and smooth as a pearl. So I thought I'd let it play a bit longer and then do a couple of bits at the same time. Sorry if I'm yawning again. It's partly just from being in this room all day, and it's partly because last night my son was doing a Cubs sort of camp night, but obviously we're in lockdown and had to do like camping in your own home, so they had to make a den and then sleep in it, or as it turned out, not sleep in it because it was not in their own bed. So None of us got much sleep last night, so that's why I'm a bit even more tired than usual. So I do apologise. Anyway, so just an interesting figurative description there, isn't it? Can you rework your past? The grit that rubs in you. I mean, that's very Funda, isn't it? I mean, this is essentially what she looks for. She looks for the grit that rubs in you until it's shiny and smooth as a pearl. It's just interesting. I mean, the rhetorical question there, presumably the answer is no, you can't really. You can't rework your past to make it smooth and shiny. It is there, and it's warts and all. And then just where we've just stopped here, there's an interesting absence of deixis here. She talks about, I look at the box and the box is deep. Now, you'd expect to say, I look at the box and it is deep. But she repeats the box. And I don't know, I'm probably, clutching at straws here and scraping the barrel and all that stuff. But I think it's to emphasise the sort of laboriousness and the methodical nature with which he is digging into his past, but also in which she is too digging into people's pasts. And so the box represents more than just a box. It's actually his past. And of course, there are many boxes in this text, and each one is people's past. So it's sort of symbolic, isn't it? And so I think by repeating the phrase "the box," it just reminds us that this is hard work, both in terms of time and also in terms of kind of psychological strain and emotional strain as well. So that in this case, that's an absence of deixis in that case, rather than anything else. It's sort of the absence of a technique.
You have to understand, he says, in the context of my father and of the propaganda of the Cold War, the GDR was like a religion. It was something I was brought up to believe in. He speaks passionately and loudly, although I am sitting close to him and the room is small. I watch him waving his arms and my microphone. He brings out more photographs and more documents, and I hear him say, "You can see here after the war we had no mattresses, holes in our socks." But I am mulling over the idea of the GDR as an article of faith. Communism, at least of the East German variety, was a closed system of belief. It was a universe in a vacuum, complete with its own self-created hells and heavens, its punishments and redemptions meted out right here on earth. Many of the punishments were simply for lack of belief, or even suspected lack of belief. Disloyalty was calibrated in the minutest of signs. The antenna turned to receive Western television. The red flag not hung out on May Day. Someone telling an off-colour joke about Hanukkah just to stay sane.
Just the triadic structure there. I won't bother
Eugenia
stopping
at school, with her tight sausage fingers, explaining the leap of faith that was required before the closed universe of Catholicism would make any sense. Her fingers made the leap, pink and unlikely, as we children drew the fruits of the Holy Spirit. A banana for redemption, as I recall, and all I could think of was a sausage person walking off a cliff top, believing all the time the hand of God would scoop him up. The sense of having someone examine your inner worth, the violence of the idea that it can in fact be measured, was the same. God could see inside you to reckon whether your faith was enough to save you. The Stasi could see inside your life too, only they had a lot more sons on earth to help.
So she's making this interesting stretch here, this analogy to religion and God, and I suppose the point there is that it shows just how all-consuming, and it would be, how all-consuming the GDR was and that way of life. And you can imagine, can't you, that if that was your life, it would require that kind of faith. And when you can't see anything else, when that's all you ever see, that's all you ever know, and you can see how people would have lived their lives believing in something, having faith in something. It's quite frightening, really. So it's a particularly poignant analogy to make, to refer it back to God seeing inside you and determining your future in the same way the Stasi did, very much in a real sense.
The GDR in its 40 years tried strenuously both to create socialist German man and to get the people to believe in him. Socialist German man was to be different from Nazi German man and different from Western capitalist imperialist German man.
So this repetition of man here, you've got, it's an anaphoric reference back to the title of the chapter, so it's going to make it more sense. But you've also got this epistrophe here where it's ending each clause with the same phrase and certainly the same word man, but also German.
History was taught as a series of inevitable evolutionary leaps towards communism, from a feudal state through capitalism, and then, in the greatest leap forward to date, socialism. The communist nirvana was the world to come. Darwinian diagrams flash into my mind, showing man on a scale of increasing uprightness and lack of body hair, from monkey to Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon to modern. Here now in front of me is socialist man, smooth and keen and very, very verbal.
So, I mean, the point of that epistrophe from earlier in this paragraph was just simply, I assume, to sort of show how evolved or how controlled and crafted and shaped the GDR sculpted its citizens. So by having that epistrophe and that repetition of the word man, it shows just how all-consuming and extensive their recrafting of their own civilization was. And then towards the end, it's really stretching this metaphor of the sort of Darwinian evolution of man. Here now in front of me is socialist man. So it's stretching that metaphor to now be a different kind of man. So stretching the idea of evolution into political terms. And then that triadic structure, which sort of builds to incrementum, smooth and keen and very, very verbal. And the doubling there of pre-modifier just helps to give it that sense of incrementum. And it's sort of that this man in front of her is the product of this GDR society. I mean, and it very much is, because as we learn in the chapter, he's been shaped from birth, essentially, and he's a product of that regime.
As Koch dips into the carton once more, I wonder whether he ever wished he had been a disruptive and disorderly pupil instead of a diligent and orderly one, whether it would have saved him from carrying his explanatory box through life. My story comes directly out of my father's story. Hagen Koch passes me the photograph of his father again, and Heinz Koch looks out from early in the century. He had the same brown eyes as his son, but in a narrower, more doubtful face. Heinz Koch was born in a village in Saxony on the 5th of August 1912, and was brought up as the son of the village tailor. One day, when he was 16 years old, he ran home from school distraught with his report card in his hand. In the space for name was written Koch, Heinz, grandson of the master tailor. Koch pulls a yellowing report from the box. This occurred on the 23rd of the 3rd, 1929, he says, shaking the document. On that day, my father learnt of his illegitimacy. His big sister was his mother. Heinz was stunned by the realization that everyone had lied to him. You all hid this from me for so long. Who was his real father? I ask. I'll get to that, Hagen says. According to the German moral code of that time, illegitimacy was terrible, shameful. Heinz was immediately ostracized by his friends and left school. He decided to join the army, hoping that a uniform would hide the stigma of his birth. In September 1929, he signed up for a 12-year term of duty.
Now, again, we've got Anna Funder's voice here. Funder's voice, I should say. Heinz was immediately ostracized by his friends. Okay, that's possibly based on fact. He decided to join the army, hoping that a uniform would hide the stigma of his birth. Now, that's not direct speech from what's his name? Hagen. This is Funder's own narrative voice. Now, it could be based on reported speech. We don't know, but we need to look out for that objectivity or subjectivity here. It's possibly Funder's own opinion here on why, and it certainly seems credible. I'm sure that is why he joined the army. But just be aware that not everything here is being presented or is being delivered through speech and through dialogue. Some of it is opinion presented as fact from Funder.
Heinz Koch got more than he bargained for. By the time his term was due to expire in October 1941, he found himself stationed in France as part of the Nazi occupation force and could not be discharged. In May 1945, after Berlin surrendered, Master Sergeant Koch somehow made it back to Dessau, to his wife and 2 small children. He travelled over a landscape pockmarked with craters, through towns of rubble with pipes and plumbing exposed in the streets. People were crazy with pain and secrets. In the woods and on the roads were refugees, war criminals, rogue bomber groups and Allied forces who had started the Cold War between them before the hot one had ended.
Just a synthetic list there, isn't there, of the things he's seen and the experiences he's had in the woods, the war refugees, the So the refugees, the war criminals, the rogue bomber groups, and the Allied forces. And then there's that pun, isn't there, play on words, that started the Cold War between them before the hot one had ended. Now, no one refers to the Second World War as the hot war, but she's playing on the idea of if this is the Cold War, then the one preceding it must have therefore been a hot war, because I suppose it involved direct battle, didn't it? But she's playing with that idea and that sort of metaphor there.
In Dresden, he thought he smelt rotting flesh. But 1 week after the war ended, Heinz Koch was home. At the Potsdam Conference, Dessau was given to the Russians. They released him from active duty. Koch is talking, dipping into his document box, talking. Then he leans forward as if to tell me a weighty piece of information. I smell his aftershave.
Back to those olfactory senses again. I smell his aftershave. In fact, unusual for Funda, we don't get a simile or any sort of bathos about how the aftershave smells, but she smells it all the same, not like her to pass upon an olfactory sense. In fact, even before, look at that, in Dresden he thought he smelt rotting flesh. What a bizarre thing to include, because it doesn't go anywhere, that bit of information. It doesn't seem to develop. It's just purely something about something he thought he smelt. But Funda's included that because, of course, it refers to the sense of smell and she can't resist it. She just loves it.
On the 1st of September 1945, he says, the Soviet command issued Heinz with a permission to ride a bicycle. Why did people need a permit to ride a bike? I ask. Because they could bring messages, pass on news, Koch cries. There was no other transport. People on bikes could evade checkpoints. They could have secret meetings. Clearly, the atmosphere of paranoid control had set in early under the Russians. All the same, I've started to worry about the level of detail we are sinking into. I steal a look towards his bottomless box, wondering whether we are descending into the morass for the sake of it, or whether there was some point to the bicycle tale. Then, as he turns away from me to put the document back in his box, he says, but beforehand, you realise they had to vet his record to check that he wasn't an evil person. Was this the point? Was Koch using the available evidence, in this case a bicycle permit, to construct or confirm a story of his father's innocence during the war? There's clearly a portion of the past here that cannot be pinned down with facts or documents. All that exists is permission to ride a bike.
And again, Funda finishing a paragraph, and in this case a whole section of the chapter with bathos there, that with all this mountain of information, or endless box as she refers to it, this, what did she call it? Bottomless box, there we are. That metaphor and hyperbole, hopefully, bottomless box. All that can be found is permission to ride a bike, which is bathos, isn't it? Because it's so ridiculous. And she's concerned, obviously, that possibly this box, and maybe the whole journey, her whole mission here really is sort of leading nowhere. So I think again we're looking out for that. There's a general sense of dissatisfaction with Funda, isn't there? That it boils down to being dissatisfied with what she's seeing and what she's receiving.
Immediately after the war ended, the Allies divided up their conquered enemy. The English, Americans, and later the French took over the western parts of Germany, and the Russians took the eastern states of Thuringia, Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, Mecklenburg-West Pomerania, and Brandenburg. Berlin was divided among the victors in the same way, its western suburbs to the English, Americans, and French, its eastern ones to the USSR. But because the city lay deep in the eastern zone, its western suburbs became an odd island of democratic administration and market economy in a communist landscape. In their zones, the Western powers set about catching prominent Nazis and establishing democratic systems of governance, a federated system of states, the division of political, administrative, and judicial power, and guarantees of private property. In 1948, they handed over these institutions to the newly created Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, together with massive injections of funds from the Americans' Marshall Plan. The Russians ran the eastern parts of Germany directly until the German Democratic Republic was established as a satellite state of the USSR in 1949. Production was nationalised, factories and property turned over to the state, healthcare, rent and food were subsidised. One-party rule was established with an all-powerful secret service to back it up, and the Russians, having refused the offer of American capital, plundered East German production for themselves. They stripped factories of plant and equipment which they sent back to the USSR. At the same time, they required a rhetoric of communist brotherhood from the East Germans, whom they had liberated from fascism. Whatever their personal histories and private allegiances, the people living in this zone had to switch from being, rhetorically at the very least, Nazis one day to being communists and brothers with their former enemies the next. And almost overnight, the Germans in the eastern states were made, or made themselves, innocent of Nazism. It seemed as if they actually believed that Nazis had come from and returned to the western parts of Germany, and were somehow separate from them, which was in no way true. History was so quickly remade, and so successfully, that it can truly be said that the Easterners did not feel then, and do not feel now, that they were the same Germans as those responsible for Hitler's regime. This sleight of history must rank as one of the most extraordinary innocence manoeuvres of the century.
Absolutely, and I think the superlative there is absolutely, it's true. I mean, it is remarkable, isn't it? And the use of that pun there, this sleight of history, must rank as one of the most extraordinary innocence manoeuvres of the century. Is a pun, isn't it? It's like we associate sleight with sleight of hand and magic tricks in order to deceive the audience or mislead the audience. So it's a play on words there. Good old thunder.
In Dresden once, on a blue bridge over the river Elbe, I saw a plaque commemorating the liberation of the East Germans from their Nazi oppressors by their brothers, the Russians. I looked at it for a long time, a small thing dulled by grime from the air. I wondered whether it had been put there immediately after the Russians came into a vanquished Germany, or whether a certain time had been allowed to elapse before things could begin to be rewritten.
An interesting metaphor, isn't it? It's really a dead metaphor because it's used so often and so accurately that it doesn't require decoding. But you know that things have been rewritten, and it's a very apt metaphor, of course, because that is how history is formed. It's how versions of events are written and in this case rewritten and recorded and taught in the case of GDR schools. So it's a metaphor, of course, but there's also some real truth behind that metaphor. So it's a very powerful figurative phrase.
To start a new country with new values and newly minted socialist citizens, it is necessary to begin at the beginning, with children. School teachers in the eastern regions were immediately dismissed because their job had been to educate children in the values of the Nazi regime. Socialist teachers had to be created. The authorities established 6-month training schemes for people's teachers, who then went into the schools. By February 1946, Heinz Koch, who hadn't finished school himself, was a fully qualified teacher in the village of Lindau, 30 kilometres from Dessau. In October of that year, the first free democratic elections were held in East Germany. In fact, throughout the life of East Germany, elections were regularly held. On the ballot paper, there were representatives of all the major parties, mirror-image replicas of the parties that existed in West Germany. There were centre-right Christian Democrats, CDU, Liberal Democrats, later the FDP, and Communists, SED. Election after election for 40 years, the results would be broadcast on television, and always, overwhelmingly, the Communists were voted in. The majorities stretched credibility, 98.1%, 95.4%, 97.6%. None of this, though, was evident in 1946. At that time, it was possible, just possible, that somehow a socialist state would emerge which lived up to the democratic of its name. They'd all been through hell on earth. Didn't they deserve heaven? People's dreams had been honed by suffering, whittled into sharp and definite shapes. Heinz Koch founded the Lindau branch of the Liberal Democrats and stood for election as mayor. September there is a month of long sunsets, late light falling through the leaves, still on the trees. Even in this land of rubble and dust, there was room for hope. This was, after all, an election. There were parties, there were candidates, there were local campaigns, and there were polling stations. And there was a ballot paper on which the Communist Party candidate's name was top of the list. It might have been a coincidence, except that next to this candidate's name, Paul Enke, was written not SED candidate, but already mayor. Nevertheless, when the vote came in, it was clear Heinz Koch had won the election. Lindau was a tiny place. The Liberal Democrats got 363 votes, the SED 289, and the CDU 131. People no longer wanted right or left, they wanted middle of the road. But Enke, the communist, Koch said, was chairman of the Electoral Commission. Enke immediately called a meeting in the town hall for the evaluation of the vote. Koch tells me that the hall was full of women, some with children. There were several old men, but there were scarcely any young or middle-aged ones. Enke welcomed them and then addressed the room. "So, where are all your men?" There was a silence, shuffling. "Fallen in war," came one answer. "Missing in action," said another voice. One woman said quietly, "I don't know." Then a voice came from the back of the hall. "My husband is a prisoner of war in Russia." Enke seized his moment. "How many of your men are in POW camps?" he asked. The hands started to go up, at first slowly, but then there were many. "So how long did your husband serve in the forces?" Enke asked a woman sitting near the front. 1 year, she said. The answers started to come from all over the room. 5 years, 3 years, 7 years. "And for that they were taken prisoners of war?" "That's the way it happened," said the woman. "Well, I ask you," said Enke, "do you think it right that your men, who served 3 years, 5 years, 7 years in the armed forces, are in prison, when Master Sergeant Koch, on my right here, who served that fascist imperialist army for 16 years, gets off scot-free? Not one single day's punishment?" So, in this way, Koch says, my father was sentenced to 7 years in a prisoner of war camp. "What? Just like that?" I ask. Koch is agitated now. "The Russians came and took him into custody. That was just the way it worked. And the people said that it's right that it should be so. If my husband is sitting it out over there, then so should he." Between 1945 and 1950, the Russian secret police imprisoned POWs, Nazis, and others like infantryman Heinz Koch, who might have got in their way. They reused the Nazi concentration camps of Sachsenhausen and Buchenwald and other places, and when they were full, they built new prisons or sent people to Russia. It is estimated that some 43,000 of these people died from illness, starvation, or violence after the war. In Lindau, the people helped the victors punish their fellows and called it fair. After nearly a month in custody, on the 22nd of October 1946, Enke came to visit his prisoner. Heinz thought his time was up. Enke started in on an unusual tack. "It's your wife's birthday today, I gather," he said. "Yes. Wouldn't it be a nice birthday surprise for her if you came home? What would you say to that?" Heinz was confused. He had been steeling himself for transportation. "Is that possible?" he asked. "Sure it is. I am mayor, after all, and what I say goes." There was a pause. Then it became clear. "What are the conditions?" Heinz asked. "Relax, comrade, relax. It's simple, really. All you need to do is quit the Liberal Democrats and come over to us. Become a member of the Socialist Unity Party. Just as soon as that happens, I can take you home. In fact, I could take you home today." Koch is looking at me closely. "What would you do?" he asks. "How should my father decide?" "For the wife and life, of course," I say. Koch is pleased, smiling and nodding and waving the mic. "So," he says, "on his wife's birthday, Heinz changed parties and went home." In this way, the Lindau Communist Party annihilated its opposition, and at the same time installed one of their own as the local primary school teacher, under threat of deportation to a POW camp. They had him where they could keep an eye on him. There was only one school, and the children of all the party members were there. Later that same year, Hagen started school. Heinz taught all his pupils the doctrine of communism, including his little boy. He found himself educating good socialist citizens for a regime that had tried to ruin his family and his life. In late 1946, the communists founded the Junge Pioniere, a youth organization designed to instill in young children a love of Marx and country.
Just noticed a little example of Zugma there. That was not one to miss, was it? So the paragraph above tried to ruin his family and his life. And that's Funder rather than Koch, isn't it? That's her thoughts and her subjective opinion, but it's there, so you can see that's something that would come through her way of filtering the information and not deciphering, but distilling the information down for us. So you use of Zugma there to intensify it, really, because ruin his family is one thing, but ruin his life is something much bigger. So there's a incrementum between the two things as well. So it's a powerful technique.
For the older ones, the Free German Youth was established. The scheme mirrored exactly the Nazis' Pimpfer for small children and the Hitler Youth for adolescents. People joked that the Free German youth and the Hitler youth were so similar that only the colour of the neckerchiefs distinguished them. In both, there were meetings, torches, oaths of allegiance, and a confirmation ceremony for 13-year-olds, complete with candles and prayer-like incantations.
That asyndetic list there, just too sinister, isn't it, really? But it's quite chillingly to remind us of just how many ways in which they were indoctrinated and made to feel a certain way and feel to belong to a certain identity. And it's the sort of behaviour of cults, isn't it? Sorry, I said cults there just in case you misheard me. It's the behaviour of cults to do that and sort of indoctrinate people. So I think that's, the asyndetic list just reinforces that and reminds us, or gives that suggestion of how intense and how wide-reaching the ceremonies are, or were rather.
All small children were required to join the Pioniere, but this came too soon for the villagers of Lindau. They balked at seeing their children once more in line and marching, and refused to put them in uniform again for the powers that be. Heinz Koch was arrested and taken into custody. Enke said, "Why should the other children join up if the teacher's own son does not?" It was necessary for Heinz Koch to set an example through his son. He was released and given one more chance to show why he should not be deported. Koch turns to his box and pulls out a small blue scarf. "So, as a result, on the 13th of December 1946, I was the first child to wear this kerchief around my neck." This is how Hagen Koch became a Musterknabe, a poster boy for the new regime.
And that use of German there, Musterknabe, you're welcome, to give us that authenticity as well, to immerse us in the language, in the same way that he himself was immersed in the culture and the identity.
My gaze has wandered to the wall behind him. Next to the gold plate hangs a girly calendar displaying a naked woman's torso in a forest. The photographer has cut off her head and her legs below the knee. The caption reads, "Wilderness Area." Hagen Koch turns back to his box, his collection of strange talismans from a bygone world. "Let me show you this beetle," he says, pulling out a poster. He unrolls it. "Stop the American Beetle" is written in large capitals across the top. Below, there's a drawing of a child holding a magnifying glass to the ground. Under it is a beetle with a human face and big human teeth. The beetle wears a jacket in the colours of the American flag, and its face is the face of President Truman. "These were all over our school," he says, and explains why. In 1948, the Russians decided they had had enough of the small island of capitalist imperialism that was West Berlin. It seethed with the spies of enemy countries. It was a toehold for the Allies on socialist soil. In a modern siege, Stalin's forces cut off land supply routes through East Germany to West Berlin. On the night of the 24th of June 1948, they switched off the eastern power plant that supplied the city. The West Berliners were to be starved out in the dark. But the Allies would not give up the 2 million West Berliners. For almost a year, from June 1948 to October 1949, they kept the city alive by plane. At that time, American and British planes made some 277,728 flights through Soviet airspace to drop bundles of food, clothing, cigarettes, medicine, fuel and equipment, including components for a new power station, to the people of West Berlin.
The asyndetic list there, again, as it always does, it reminds and reinforces the range, in this case, of how much aid and help was given by the Allied forces flying over. And it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? When my wife's granddad was involved in the Berlin airlifts, and he was involved in many of those flights that went over and dropped aid off to those people in West Berlin. It's an incredible thing. But the list there just reinforces how much aid was given to them, but also how much aid was needed as well. So just how troubled these people were because of the way in which they were cut off by apparently their own people, the Soviet Union, who essentially just cut them out completely.
In the West, the aircraft came to be known as the Rosinenbomber, or raisin bombers, because they brought food. But in the East, Koch and his classmates were told the enemy planes sprayed potato beetles over East German crops as they flew over, in order to spoil the harvest. Lindau was virtually under the flight path. The planes flew day and night, Koch says. This is how they gave us a picture of the enemy. In a place where people get no news from outside, they have nothing else to believe. Why was it credible that the Americans would do this? I ask. It seemed improbable that a nuclear superpower would be loading up planes full of live beetles on leaves and setting out across the Atlantic with them. Because they had just bombed Dresden flat, he cried. That beautiful centre of German culture. Senselessly. And they even dropped 2 atom bombs on Japan. They were clearly, truly evil. What more proof do you need? Bombs, atomic weapons, and now a biblical pestilence.
The list there, and the extended metaphor of a biblical pestilence, which of course is hyperbolic, but it does link back to that earlier allegory that she made in the same chapter. And it's sort of compelling. You can see very easily how the GDR would have used that information and twisted it and contorted it to, well, I'm saying twisted it. I mean, that is the truth, isn't it? They did bomb 2 atom bombs on Japan. Dresden had been bombed flat. These are truths, and they're unpleasant truths for us as Westerns, I think, to have to face. But you can certainly see how the likes of the GDR would have used this to build that propaganda. And I think one of the reasons I find this, I think as a teacher, I find this chapter particularly harrowing because, we realise just how important education is and how it can be, in the wrong hands, it can be used in such a powerful way to shape whole cultures and identities, and it can be really, really dangerous. And we're so lucky, I think, to be living in a free world, and I say that in inverted commas, I guess, because how free are we? But we all as a teacher, you just want to be able to, you just want to teach the truth. I think that's the point. And here he's had to live this life of, or his father had to live a life of teaching what he knew necessarily wasn't the truth, but that was his choice. He had to be given, and he feels so lucky being in a school where you can teach freedom, I suppose, and teach liberty. But it really does make you question things like the history curriculum, I think, and what we're exposed to and what we're not exposed to. In fact, there's a great poem called "Checking Out My History" by John Agard. And if you've not heard it, or even if you have heard it, I'll try and find it at the end of this podcast. Just a little treat, and it just questions the sort of the education that you're given shapes your whole identity and your whole culture, and it's a fascinating thing, but it's also a very scary thing, I think, as well. It's a really big responsibility.
I am telling you how propaganda works, he continues. That is how I grew up. At this time, there was still rationing. Sugar was scarce and boiled sweets were a luxury. But there was an incentive scheme for the children. For every beetle we collected, we could redeem a penny. For a lava, a halfpenny. And for every 100, we got 10 ration cards for sugar. So we children went into the fields every spare minute we had, collecting beetles and larvae. We handed them in, and we got more sweets than we could eat. In Koch's mind, the sweet taste of reward is connected with foiling the American plot to spoil the potato crop and starve his people. This story of insects and sweets and the making of an enemy is the story of the making of a patriot.
Finishing there with that polysyndetic list there of this story of insects and sweets and the making of an enemy is just, well, as combined with that juxtaposition of insects and sweets, those two very, very different words and very different ideas, it creates quite an odd dissonance, I think. And it's just farcical, isn't it? I suppose it's just by putting them together with those connectives, using that polysyndeton, it creates this very farcical ridiculousness, which of course so much of this is. We can say, looking back with hindsight, how ridiculous it is. But this was real for people, it was terrifying. And it is terrifying still. But here we are, it's a story of the making of a patriot, and here he is, he's been shaped, but, he's very open and honest and reflective, it seems, but it's still, I think, really quite a harrowing chapter and a harrowing thing to learn about how someone's life can be shaped so I don't know, really, just that someone can be so passive in their own upbringing, I guess, and be the product of their own education. And I suppose aren't we all? I guess it makes you question your own education, I think, and your own upbringing. I suppose it's powerful stuff. But that's it for chapter 16. So I'm going to leave it there. But I'm just going to find you, if I can. Hopefully I can find a reading of this poem. And you can feel free to turn this off if you want to at this point. But I won't know if you listen to it or not. But if you want to, just stay with me a few minutes longer. Checking, just bear with me. I could pause it and edit it nicely, but I thought you'd like the warts and all approach. Let's see, does this one going to give us him reading it? I think it probably is. Checking out my history.
The first line in our history book, I seem to remember, was West Indian history begins in 1492 with the arrival of Columbus. It's that very Eurocentric view. Nothing exists until the European has entered the arena. The retelling of history depends a lot on who's telling the story. Them tell me what they want to tell me. Bandage up my eye with my own history, blind me to my own identity. Them tell me about 1066 and all that. Them tell me about Dick Whittington and he cat. But to St. Louis, but you know, them never tell me about that. I would like to think that the poem has a celebratory side. It's celebrating characters such as Toussaint Louverture or Mary Seacole or the Amerindian past. But in a poem, you're not writing a history book. You're not writing a piece of journalism. So no matter how well-intentioned you might be, or how crucial the facts might be, that wouldn't make a poem. So it came out in that way, like a counterpoint of two voices. So one voice is the nursery rhymes, counterpointed by a celebration of historical characters. Them tell me about the man who discovered the balloon and the cow jump over the moon. Them tell me the dish run away with the spoon, but them never tell me about Nanny the maroon. When I think of Nanny, I'm thinking of like you're casting a spell. So I think from those words you get the feeling, how can I deliver this? This is a woman who used the traditions of her African ancestry. So that becomes a kind of a spell against an oppressive regime at the time. Nanny, seafar woman of mountain dream, fire woman, struggle, hopeful stream to freedom river. You can write a poem in Creole, but it might be a very reactionary poem. It might be very sexist. So it doesn't mean that writing a poem in Creole automatically means you're right on. But you're using all of your registers of speech, your linguistic heritage, and it gives a pride simultaneously in language, but also in history. Them tell me about Lord Nelson and Waterloo, but them never tell me about Shagga the Great Zulu. Them tell me about Columbus and 1492, but what happened to the Carib and the Arawak too? Let's say I'm playing with words the way you might play with musical notes. So a text becomes like a musical score. And sometimes the voice of delivery doesn't show itself until after the poem is written. Them tell me about Florence Nightingale and she lamp, and how Robin Hood used to camp. Them tell me old King Cole was a merry old soul, but them never tell me about Mary Seacole. The poet hopefully keeps us in touch with the vulnerable core of language that makes you what you are. It keeps you in touch with the heartfelt and vulnerable, fragile, complex, contradictory nature of the human beast.
Them tell me what they want to tell me. But now I checking out me own history. I carving out me identity.
So there you go. If you've heard that before, hopefully it was nice to hear it again. But if you haven't heard it before, looking up John Agard, great, fantastic poet. But yeah, really good poem. Checking out my history, and I thought it was just particularly pertinent for this chapter, and it makes us reflect on our own history and our own identity and our own education, I think, and our own upbringing. That was a lot of anaphora and parallel phrasing there, wasn't it? Sorry about that. Right, until next time then we're to chapter 17 next, aren't we? Not too many left to go now. We're getting there. See you later.